Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Rosecrans from the Miami University Alumni Association. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Miami Women Presents Intentional Goal Setting for an Aligned Life. If this is your first time hearing about Miami Women, it is the Miami Initiative for Advancing, Mentoring, and Investing in Women. Working with our campus partners, we provide networking and professional development opportunities for all women, virtually and in person. In fact, if you're watching and you live near Dayton, Ohio, we will be there on January 31st for a lunchtime event. Registration is still open for that, and we'd love to see you there. We also help to fund specialty projects that Miami faculty, staff, and students seek help for through the Miami Women Giving Circle. Our presenter today knows the Miami Women program well, as she has attended all of our Miami Women Symposium events since she graduated from Miami. Jean Madison Reiser, class of 2014, is a coach and consultant running her own business where she focuses on helping people build a vision for their lives. She helps them learn how their work aligns with that and how to understand their strengths in order to show up with their whole selves at work. In addition to individual coaching, Jean Madison also works with small businesses and nonprofits to improve culture, to build human-centric development processes, and help companies figure out what developing a more human-centered and balanced work environment can do for their people and their bottom line. Jean Madison was an international studies and social justice studies double major here at Miami University, and she was highly involved on campus. She recently became part of a Miami merger when she married her Miami sweetheart, Sam Flessner. They live in Salt Lake City, Utah. Jean Madison, a couple of housekeeping notes. We will try to address questions that were collected during registration during the presentation today. And if you're watching live, you can submit questions as we go along. There's a button that says ask a question. So you just click on that button. It's underneath your video. Also, Jean Madison has shared a worksheet for today's webinar that you can access by clicking on the resources button. And if you pre-registered for this webinar, you should have received an email from my colleague, Emily Lefevers, with that attachment as well. So feel free to email us during the session or make a comment if you're having any kind of trouble getting that worksheet. And then lastly, you will have the opportunity to share your responses and reactions. In fact, Jean Madison will ask you to do that at certain times during today's webinar. And so you'll just use the ask a question button to share your thoughts during the webinar. So Jean Madison, thank you so much for being here with us today. I've enjoyed our planning calls, and I am going to try to pay attention with my host hat on because I'm also excited to participate in what you're going to do with us today as a person who, if I weren't hosting this webinar, I would definitely be watching it. So welcome.
Thank you. And I think there's a recording, right? So you can watch it afterwards as well. Well, thank you for that. And welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. As Michelle mentioned in her lovely introduction, my name is Jean Madison. I am a coach. I wear a lot of hats. I have rarely ever been one thing. And so with my coaching, I focus on career development. I focus on life goals and mindfulness practices. I have a background in yoga. I have a background in strengths coaching, as well as human potential coaching. But I'm really just excited to be here today to talk a little bit about intentional goal setting and how that might look a little bit different than what you're expecting today. So I know we had some questions come in before the session this morning. Most of them were around discipline and kind of motivation. And I'm hoping that the process that I walk you through today will really help you to see how sometimes having motivation and discipline isn't quite as necessary when you have goals that are really aligned with the life that you want to live. So because we're talking about intentional goals today, I wanted to tell you a little story about a big lofty dream that I had that turned into an intentional goal that has now turned into a reality. So I think the first Miami Women's Symposium was 8 years ago. I think I was a senior in college. I know that was the first one I attended. And I think it was the first one because I've been to all of them. But 8 years ago, I attended the first Miami Women's Symposium, and I was captivated by the women that were presenting. They talked about their careers, they talked about their lives. It was an opportunity to see so many incredible women who, over the years, had been able to design this life that worked best for them. And in this 2 days of just being in awe of all of these people, I had two major aha moments or realizations. The first one was when I attended a session by a coach who did an amazing session. It honestly wasn't that different from the one we're doing today in a lot of ways. And she talked to me afterwards. She sat with my mom and I at lunch, and she actually ended up mentoring me a little bit in a couple of years down the road. And I think it's safe to say that that moment was very much the planting of the seed of, ooh, coaching. That's interesting. I wonder how that works. The second thing I remember really, really clearly thinking was, I'm going to speak at this event one day. And while I have not 100% made that goal happen just yet, at the beginning of last year, I sat down and I set an intentional goal that I was going to do something with Miami this year, whether that be talk on a panel, give a presentation, do something on campus. I didn't have a lot of structure around what it had to look like. I just knew that I wanted to do something that put me in this space. And so while I'm about 10 days late on my goal execution for the intended deadline of 2022, I think I can call this goal achieved and call this one a win. So needless to say, I am super honored and thrilled to be here today. And I hope that you take that story as the motivation that you need to set big goals, be intentional, realistic, and purposeful in your actions toward those goals, and allow for flexibility, because oftentimes the great things that happen in line with the goals that we set don't actually look like exactly what we said they would when we started. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we dive in, I just want to talk about a couple of things here. So what to expect from today's session, rules of the room. This is obviously not like a live interactive thing, so there really aren't too many rules of the room, but I do encourage participation. Michelle will be kind of feeding me things as they come through, and I love to hear your reactions, the things that come up for you throughout our time together, and any questions or clarifications you need along the way. Some things to remember as you're going through this process. I was talking with the host beforehand that I think some of you might be a little bit surprised that we actually spend the majority of our time today not setting goals. And that's because I have a reason for it that I'll share with you in the next couple of slides. But I just want you to keep in mind that there is no right way to design your life, career, or goals. Oftentimes people get caught up in like, this is what I should be doing, or this is the expected path, or I'm not successful unless A, B, C, D, E. In this space, in this next 45 minutes or so, I really want you to give yourself permission to just dream, to just think outside the box, to allow yourself to be really honest about what it is that you want in your life, what you want from your career, what you want from just the time that you spend on this planet. The second thing to remember is that the next two things are really core values of mine. The first one being everyone needs a cheerleader. And if you followed me on Instagram, I posted this yesterday about how I needed my cheerleaders yesterday preparing for this presentation. It's a big deal for me. It's something I'm really excited about. And I will tell you that the cheerleaders, they showed up. When you're setting big goals, when you're doing things that might be outside of the norm for you, you need a support system. You need cheerleaders. You can't just do it by yourself. You can try, but it's not going to be very fun. So be your own cheerleader today, but also keep in the back of your mind as we're going through this process, like, who is it that really is always there for me, is always there to kind of push me forward and cheer me on and keep me moving. And then finally, I really, really, really encourage you to practice imperfection. This has been a motto of mine for the last year and a half. It's something I created a podcast on that is kind of archived at the moment, but might be coming back soon. And it's just this idea that we spend so much time trying to be perfect and trying not to mess things up. And that's okay. That's just a part of being human in a lot of ways. It takes intentional practice to learn how to do things messy and do things imperfect and do things without knowing what the end result is going to look like. So I encourage you to go through, especially this next step, which is going to be a visualization. Let it be imperfect. It doesn't need to be the end all be all answer to all of the problems in your life. It can just be fun. It can just be something that we do together. I know that you're here because you want to set big goals, maybe for the year, maybe for the next 5-10 years, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you want to do things differently this year than you have in the past because setting goals in the past has been frustrating or, unsuccessful ultimately. Maybe you want to set intentional goals, but you really don't know how to do that or what that really means. I'd imagine a lot of you are here because you really want to make the right choice. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. And maybe you just want a clearer path forward. We're going to talk about all of these things today. And hopefully when you walk away from our session, you will know how to do things differently, how to set intentional goals, how to make the most aligned next step, next choice rather than the right choice, and feel clearer about your path forward. So to start off with, I have a question for you all. Because today's workshop will start off with envisioning your ideal life, the life that you want to live, talk about the choices and plans that you need to make in order to make that vision a reality. And whether you're here today with life goals, career goals, relationship goals, etc., we're going to talk about the big picture. So I want you to answer this question for yourself. If money were no object, what is it that you would do with your time, your energy, and your talents? So this is a question that I ask all of my clients when we're in discovery calls. And I typically get something along the lines of, well, I would be doing really well at a work, at a job that I love. I'd have more time to exercise. I'd have more time for my family. And maybe I would do some of the things that I really enjoy. And then I like to ask again, because in my mind, what I'm hearing is if life were a little bit easier, if I didn't have to worry about money, if I didn't have to worry about caring for people, that's what my life would look like. But this is a space where I want you to release all barriers, all shoulds, all what ifs, and really, really, really get honest with yourself about if money were no object, if you didn't have to worry about anything, if you didn't have to plan and think and do all of these things that we spend all of our time, for the most part, doing right now, what would your life look like? That is the question that we're going to be answering today. Because when you focus on the big picture, when you know what you want your life to feel like, how you want to personally feel on a daily basis, that's when you're able to look at career choices, at relationship choices, at other life decisions and goals, and think, does this align with the ultimate vision that I have for my life? Does this align with and help me get to the place where I'm able to live the life that I'm looking to live? So I hope that sparked a little interest there. Michelle, I feel like maybe that sparked some interest for you or people.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it's scary thoughts. I mean, do you have a time machine where you go back to college and major in something different? No, what I wanted to say is that this is the kind of thing where if you have comments that you'd like to share, please feel free to use the ask a question function, and I will be happy to read those out and share them with Jean Madison. But no pressure. You don't have to share anything either. So
yeah, please do. Please let me know as things come up. I think sometimes this sort of a topic and this sort of a like, let's picture things with no bounds, no boundaries can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's okay. Just sit with that. Again, we're practicing imperfection here. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to get it the first time around. So I'm going to walk us through a mindfulness practice, a visualization practice. It's going to help you to get a little bit more clear on what that ideal life looks like. Now, some of you might be here and you're like, hey, I signed up for goal setting. Like, I don't really want to close my eyes and do a visualization. I promise you, if you just give me the next 7 minutes, you're going to get something out of this. I have done this with corporate environments. I have done this with different types of nonprofit organizations. I've done this with all variety of people. Everyone gets a little something different out of it. But I promise it's going to help you get a little bit more clear on why you have some of these goals in your head, and or whether these goals actually are going to be the thing that moves you in the direction that you want to move in. So as I'm explaining the process here, take some time to get comfortable. If you are home or you're in a place where you can, lay down on the floor, anything of that nature, just do whatever you need to do to get comfortable. With this visualization practice, I want you to allow space for the unexpected. What comes up in this practice doesn't have to be your required next step or even something that you ever do or accomplish in your life. I encourage you to keep an open mind and allow yourself to see what your subconscious might be trying to tell you throughout this process. There is no right vision. There's no right vision. You can do this visualization practice many, many times. Most of my clients do it multiple times. And each time it's going to be a little bit different. There are going to be revisions. Things are going to get clearer, and some things are going to repeat, which also tells you something. But at the end of the day, you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to dream big, and that dream is allowed to shift, because at 30, you have no idea what 40 looks like. At 40, you have no idea what 50 looks like, and so on. So to set this vision of like, this is exactly what my life is going to look like in the future is a little bit restricting. So let's just make this a fun activity where you get to dream a little bit. So taking a moment to settle in, take a deep breath, filling up low belly, your chest, upper chest. And then exhale, release all the way out. Continue to breathe in and out, allowing yourself to release any tension from the day, allowing your thoughts to sit up on a shelf for a second, coming fully into this present moment. Today, we'll be walking through a guided visualization for the next several minutes. In this visualization, we'll be visiting a future version of yourself. So, in your mind, start to paint a picture of this future you. Where do you live? What does your home look like? As you are starting to picture this neighborhood that you live in, or this place that you live in, whatever that looks like for you, I want you to now picture yourself standing in front of that future home base. Take it all in, and then slowly walk up to the front door and give it a nice knock. As the doors open, there you are, the future version of you that you've come to meet. Take a moment to observe, noticing how you look, how you dress, how you carry yourself. What stands out most to you about this future version of yourself? Now that you've greeted one another, follow this version of you into your future home. And take the next few moments to explore your home, the life that you've created there, all of the different physical things that you can see and touch and feel. What feelings are you having as you're exploring this future home, future life of yours? Take this time to get the full picture of your ideal future life in this physical sense. Notice the style. Notice what's hanging on the walls, what's sitting on the bookshelves, what little things represent the life that you've been living. Who else lives here, if anyone? And what can you gather about future you just from looking around? As you continue making your way through your home, ask yourself, what does it look like this future you does to fill their time? It could be work, service, art, time in nature. Think both about what you are doing in contribution to the world in your work and what you do in contribution to yourself. Start to wrap up your tour of your home and make your way to a comfortable seat somewhere in your beautiful future life. And take this opportunity to sit across from your future self and ask them, what could get in the way of making this future life my reality? Are there people that could get in my way? Are there choices that I could make to derail me? What is it that you're doing now in your life that is keeping you down the path to this desired life? And what are the things that you're doing that are maybe taking you away or blocking your progress in achieving this ideal life? Ask your future self any other questions that are coming to mind and see what they have to say. Now, take the next moment to reflect on all of the areas of your life that are supporting your next steps and all of the areas that are seemingly holding you back. Ask your future self for any advice on how to get from where you are now to where you're hoping to go. Thank your future self and take your time as you start to walk away out the front door, down the street. walking away from the life that you will soon be living, knowing deep down that what you want wants you in return. Now slowly start to make your way back into your space, wiggling your fingers and toes, bringing some small movements back into your body. And I want you to grab your notebook and pen and start to take the next 2 to 3 minutes to reflect on what you saw. Now, we will have some questions up to help you reflect, but right now I want you to focus on just brain dumping everything that came up for you. Everything you saw, everything you experienced, things that surprised you, things that you didn't expect, or things that really fit in with the idea that you have of your life. And I'm going to play a little bit of music while you all are reflecting. Take the next 20 seconds or so to wrap up your thoughts, knowing you can always come back to these questions after our session is over. All right, bring it back here. So feel free to screenshot these questions. We'll also be sending these reflection questions in the follow-up email that comes after the session. But as we move forward, I personally find this visualization to be really fun. And I hope that you saw some things that comforted you, maybe surprised you or excited you at the end of the day. But, the ideal life isn't real, or at least not entirely. And we can't just snap our fingers and be there, but we can work to cultivate the feelings that we had when we were in that environment. And so, the ideal life visualization, it's not reality. It's not necessarily something that you can ever achieve. Rather, I see this practice as a touchstone, as a guidepost, as something for you to come back to each time there's a fork in your road, in your path, every time you have a big decision that you need to make about whether I want to do this or I want to do this. and having this vision and this touchstone to help you to determine the direction that you want to go and what most aligns with that vision and feeling that you want to have in your life. So, as you're looking at this vision for your ideal life, I want you to think about what parts of that life do you live now? What are some of the small things that you can implement, to help you move closer to that vision? Because oftentimes we set these big goals, we see this bigger picture and we're like, oh, wow, I'm never going to get there. Oh, wow, that's so excessive. But when you really think about it, there are probably parts of that ideal vision that you just had that you already do in your daily life or that you could easily implement, right? So sometimes clients talk about like, oh, I had all this free time to be outside and be in nature and walk every day. And my question is always, okay, so what's keeping you from doing that now? Yes, maybe having the massive, beautiful house that you envision for yourself is not something you can do tomorrow, but you could start walking outside 10 minutes a day, right? So before we dive into the big goal setting and the strategy, which will come up next, I do want you to think about like, what are the pieces of your ideal life you're already living? And use that as a little bit of a gratitude practice of, wow, I'm already doing that. That's so cool. I'm already doing pieces of this life that I want to live. And then what are 2 to 3 small items, small things that you can implement just this week that are reflective of your vision, that give you that same feeling? And that's really where we're going to start, because, creating small actions and rituals that remind you of this ideal life that you're creating for yourself, creating those touchstones to constantly bring you back to that feeling, that's what's ultimately going to help you commit to and stick with some of your goals and your intentional goals. Knowing what you're aiming for beyond like the actual checkbox item is really, really important, which is why we just did that visualization practice. So I'll share just briefly with my vision building. Obviously, I'm a coach. I work in recruitment. I work with small teams. But y'all, my vision when I do that activity is owning a retreat center in the middle of the mountains. And while there are pieces of that that's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I could see how we could get there. That vision honestly really shocked me the first time it kind of came up. I was like, oh, interesting. Is that really what I want to do? And then I spent some time thinking about like, okay, how would I feel if I was living that life? What kinds of things would I be doing on a daily basis that I want to do? And that's where you start to pick out the little pieces where it's not necessarily about the retreat center in the mountains, although that'd be awesome, but it's about how do I feel on a daily basis? What are the things I'm doing? How am I spending my time? And how can I start to replicate that in small ways today? All right. So how to use your vision. When you start with the life you envision, then you work backwards. It's pretty straightforward. So let's say that right now you are really burnt out in the job that you have. Okay. What could you do right now to promote well-being, to promote healing, and to start to move forward and away from this situation that you're currently in? Make it small, make it simple, just baby steps, right? Because there's the end goal of like not being burnt out anymore, but there's a lot of steps that come in that process. Let's say that you are really happy with and content with your life. Maybe you are retired, you're no longer as focused on a career, but maybe more of just how you're spending your time, a purpose. But you're ready for a challenge. You're ready to do something more with your life. What boundaries and expectations can you set to ensure that you maintain the peace and contentment that you have in your life currently while you're pursuing your next adventure, your next service experience, your next piece of work? Maybe you've identified your ideal life and now you have to make the money to make that life happen. That's real. How can you think outside of the box on ways to bring in more money in your life, What are some of the strengths that you have and the things that you can do, and how can you use your time to make this process easier for you as you move in that direction? So those are just some examples of ways to use your vision, ways to continue paying attention to it. And now we get to go into intentional goal setting, the reason that you all are here. We have finally made it. So we have arrived at the goal setting piece of this conversation. And as we've talked about before, the point here is to work backwards, always using your vision, your ideal life as kind of the lighthouse that you are, continuing to move toward. This vision is the thing that you're going to take your goal and you're going to put it up against and say, does this make sense? So on the screen, you can see an example of the goal setting worksheet. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but again, you should be able to download that in the resources as well. And I believe the document has like 5 different sheets and they should be fillable, hopefully, if my technology is working the way I'd like it to today. So you can see this example of my intentional goal setting worksheet. Now, I personally love goal setting. Big dreamer. My top strengths are like ideation and activator. I like to dream big and then start things. But we got a lot of questions about the following through with your goals and what happens when you lose motivation. And I was 100% that person. Like I would get really excited. And then, 2 months later, I'm like, this is not very fun for me anymore. And so I found that a lot of other goal setting structures personally allowed me to lose motivation and allowed me to just kind of forget my goals. And so I developed this particular system for myself, and I now use it with my clients and I share it with people who are interested in setting intentional goals because, I always encourage you to find the practice and the structure that works best for you. Today, I'm obviously going to share the one that works best for me. If it works for you, great. If not, take pieces of it, take the parts that do work and leave the rest. I want this to help you get really clear on why you're setting a particular goal, something that I think we don't often think about as much. And then also think about the goal in a way that it's deeply connected to your vision and how you want to live your whole life, not just like this one narrow area of relationships, career, health, etc. So I'm going to walk you through the worksheet really quickly and the process that I use. If you have a specific goal in mind, feel free to work this out with me. Michelle, if you have one and you want to talk through it with me, you're more than welcome to do that. But the first piece of this worksheet is the goal description. Very basic, very easy. And this is just where you write out what it is that you would like to accomplish in the way that we've always kind of written out goals. We can use my goal as an example of wanting to present something with Miami alumni. So that's the goal. You've laid it out like this is what you want. Now, the one thing I want you to keep in mind about this process is that you may do step 2 and realize that the goal is not the goal, and you go back and you redo it. So, and that's a fun part about this activity is that what you write as your goal is not necessarily what you're going to end up with as your goal. So you've written out this goal description, and then the next piece of this is why. You see, it just says why. Now, I wish I could get like a poll here, but I would venture to say that most of you, when writing out goals, have not answered the question, why? Why this goal? Why is this goal important? Why do you believe that this will move you toward your ideal life? This question is so important because, spoiler alert, if you can't answer this with something that feels good for you and feels aligned and feels energizing, then this might not be the right goal for you. And I think about this a lot in the professional sense too, because oftentimes we're kind of handed goals in the professional world where you're like, okay, that's cool. I guess I'll figure out how to work toward that. And so taking something like that and rewording it or figuring out what pieces of it feel really intentional and aligned for you, and that you can get the why behind it. Because when you have the why, it's a lot less likely that you're going to lose steam, that you're going to lose motivation, that you're going to just kind of like forget about this goal. So if I said, I want to do a presentation for Miami, and if my why was like, because I want exposure and let's just say that was the why. Like that doesn't like feel great for me. That doesn't feel motivating. It doesn't feel aligned with like the work that I do and that my vision for my life and my career. And so I can either shift the why and really come up with a good why, or I could acknowledge like, okay, maybe that's not the goal. Maybe like presenting for Miami is not the goal. Maybe the goal is becoming more involved with the Alumni Association because I want to build my network and I want to connect with people and I want to share the work that I do and help people, right? Like that feels more energizing for me. That feels more aligned with the life I want to live and the vision that I have for my life. So that's just a very off the cuff example there. The third box is the how. So once you've established the goal, once you've gotten clear on the why, once that why feels really good, it feels exciting and motivating and like, yes, when I come back to this, I'm going to be able to recommit over and over and over again. Now you're going to get into the how. So this is really the specifics of it all. So how will you do this very specifically? What are all of the different steps that you can take to break it down? And I'm saying like brain dump, like every tiny little thing. I like to put things like draft an email, edit email, send email, because sometimes when we just say, oh, I need to get a spot on the alumni calendar for my presentation, there are 100 steps that come before that process. And if you're just looking at that thing as like the how, it's going to be really hard to get there because you're going to get overwhelmed by all the little things in between. Whereas if you're able to really brain dump every single task that would have to come in order for you to accomplish this goal, then you can start to just like check them off in really small ways. Like, oh, I drafted that email. Cool. Step 1 done. So I do encourage you to just take some time once you've established your goal to just think of every single way that you could reach that goal, every single tiny little task that you could do that would move you one step closer. After the how, and if you guys have questions about any of this right now, please feel free to send those questions over because I know this can be a little bit of a lot of things happening. But moving into the when, I am personally a very deadline driven person. And so I love having deadlines. It helps me personally. You figure out what you need to do, right? It is important to set deadlines regardless of whether you're deadline driven or not, just so that you have kind of a time frame. But, I encourage you to set one big deadline, like this is when you really want to achieve this goal by, or deadlines and goals for the little steps that you have. So with my clients, I often ask them like, okay, what is it that you're going to do this week? And then what is it that you'd like to do this month? And then let's say the goal is like 6 months out. And then like, how do you want to break this down over the next 6 months? It looks different for everyone. It doesn't have to be you don't have to put this out there in a way that's like digestible for other people. It's just for you. So you put whatever you need, whatever's going to be most motivational for you. And then in these bottom spots, I do have steps for the process. And then I forget what I have here. Oh, the timeline. So those really go hand in hand with the how and the when. It's just taking those brain dumps and getting really specific about them. So getting specific about the timeline, getting specific about the actual tasks that you're going to check off your list. And now the bottom piece, I actually just did this with my husband last week, and he is the engineer to my social justice dreaming coach person. And when I told him that he needed to make a mantra, he was like, I need to do what? But just trust me. this is this idea of having a touchstone, having something that reminds you of this goal without you having to like plaster your goal up on the wall next to your desk. So it could be something like, for my example, like I present at Miami alumni event. I presented at a Miami alumni event. Simple. It doesn't have to be anything like woo-woo or crazy. It's just like a sentence, a thing that you can continue to come back to and remind yourself of. If this is a goal that feels really scary, it can be more of like I trust myself to accomplish this goal, or I am confident that I can do this. Something that's a little bit more like motivational and inspiring. So you do you. Do what feels right for you. Find a sentence that is going to remind you of why you're doing this, why it's important, and just remind you what you've committed to that you can keep coming back to. All right. I will pause just to see if there are any questions. Okay, there's a question.
Hi, yeah, I have some questions to share here. So you mentioned being deadline driven and knowing that about yourself.
Yeah.
For people who feel like they struggle with accomplishing goals, what are some ways to get to know yourself better and identify what it is that works for you? Because it feels like as you were talking, I'm thinking, yes, I love to put all the steps of something on a list. And for me, it's even attaching a verb to like the to-do list. It's not just laundry. It's, wash, dry, fold, hang up, because just the nebulous laundry might not be, and I know that's not like a big life goal, but it's a thing that most of us can relate to. But how, do you have some advice there for folks who want to understand themselves better to be more successful in this?
Absolutely. I think this is something that is really helpful to talk to someone else about and like have that. Obviously, I'm biased as a coach, but I also have worked with a lot of coaches, and that's been really helpful for me to be able to talk through things and then have someone be like, okay, I'm noticing that like, this is the pattern that we have here. But the way that I personally have benefited a lot in this area is by understanding my strengths. And so I mentioned in the beginning that I'm Clifton Strengths certified coach. But this is something where I think oftentimes like why SMART and SMARTY goals don't work well for me is because they don't allow enough space for me to have flexibility. They don't allow enough like, well, if this happens, then I got to go this way. And if this happens, then I got to go this way. That is something that if you know strengths and you read my strengths, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, you're not going to love SMART goals. Like it doesn't work well for you. But
and that was a question that has come in is we linked out to a definition of SMART and SMARTY goals, but is that a really corporate thing? I mean, I've always been in the nonprofit world with higher ed and other nonprofits. And so it's not something that I've necessarily encountered. It sounds like maybe for other people as well.
Yeah.
What is that? Would we know it by other names? And then how does this type of goal setting sit in comparison?
Yeah. So yes, I believe it's pretty corporate. I never got a full handle on it in the 7 years that I was in an organization that tried to use SMART and SMARTY goals. So essentially, I think it stands for specific, measurable, actionable, and then two other things that I can. And then IE is inclusive and equitable.
I'm just waiting for a message to come to me to say ours are totally SMART goals. How did you miss that part?
So I struggled with it. It didn't work well for me. And I understand the point of it. Like I understand the need for things to be specific and measurable. Like I do think that that's very important. I think when it comes to life goals or even career goals, it's harder to do that, right? Because there aren't always things that are super measurable. Often measurable things when we're setting personal goals are like, did I check the things off the list? Cool. Did I send 20 emails? Did I connect with 18 people? Like you can still make these things measurable in this structure. And then the attainable piece is like, I think it's attainable, not actionable. Sorry, it's attainable, gray. And, I also think that having attainable goals is great, but I also think that having that broader vision, right, of like the direction that you're going and the things that you're trying to accomplish is important to have, because a lot of times in a business setting, that's not communicated super well. This is also something I like to work with teams on of, you've set these goals, you've handed these goals down, but like, why? What's the what's the broader vision of this? Where is this going? And am I just like checking things off the list because that's the expectation? And if so, that's okay. Just be honest about it.
That actually relates to another question that we have, which is, you talked about your personal goals, about work goals, sometimes you just mentioned like being handed down work goals. Yeah. And so the question was, how can you apply this kind of thinking to goals that you did not yourself create, and yet you're still expected to meet?
Yes. That's a great question. And I was going to talk about that later, so I'm glad that it came up.
Well, if you want to hold it for later, that's okay too.
Okay, it's like right now later.
Okay, great.
Like next step on the list. But, I think that there's a couple of different ways that you can look at something like that. If you've been handed a goal at work where you're like, I don't understand why I'm being asked to do this. This doesn't make sense for what we've said, like our end, big picture goal is. One option is to ask to have a conversation about it and to reframe it a little bit, because sometimes we're given these very like structured and kind of cold goals. And if you are someone that is like motivated by the mission of your work and motivated by the vision of the organization, a lot of organizations are implementing like KPIs and things that, these key performance indicators that align with the mission and vision of the organization. And if you're receiving a goal or you're receiving instruction where you're like, I don't understand how this aligns with the bigger picture, my first recommendation is to ask, how does this align with the bigger picture? And not in like a snarky way of like, well, this doesn't seem like it aligns, but, getting clear, because if you can get that reframed for you, if you can get, oh, I see how leadership thinks that this is going to get to this, then it's easier to kind of fill out this document of like, okay, this is the why. And then here are all the different ways that I can go about doing this. Again, I know there are also places where like, here's the goal and here's how you're supposed to do it. And sometimes that can feel a little bit restrictive as well. And again, my encouragement there would be to like the second route I would recommend going is, how is this skill or this thing that you're doing or learning to do, how is that playing into your personal bigger vision? Like, how can you use that skill, as annoying as it might be to do it right now? Like, how is that eventually going to benefit you? How is that moving you in the direction of the person that you want to be, the life that you want to have, that sort of thing? And if the answer is it does not, and I hate doing it, then I would maybe encourage having some thoughts about transitioning into a different career path, which is also something that I work with people on.
What a wonderful segue into the next question. So the question is basically, where do you begin? This person says they've done a lot of reflection and they know what they want their ideal life to look like, but the money, how you sustain this life that you've envisioned feels like a barrier. And so what is your advice to navigate from where you are to where you want to be without just blowing up your life, like quitting the job you have and diving in on the other job? Yeah. I mean, I guess there are times where that could certainly work for someone if you know that you have a safety net of some sort, but if you don't,
yes,
and you feel like finances are the thing. And when you asked what's stopping you, my first thing I jotted down was fear, and the second thing was, well, I mean, money is always a thing between, not always, but money is often a thing between us and our goals. For me, it's thinking, okay, the house that I live in is not the house that I want to live in forever. Yeah. So, how do I get from where I am to owning a different home? There's, preparing the home I have to sell and that kind of thing. And then there's just so much in there. But for this person, she says it feels so big and it's just hard to know where to begin.
Yeah. Well, I will say I was the person that quit my job with no backup plan. And luckily I did have a security net there. And most people who tell me they want to quit their jobs and go into like coaching or doing something, my recommendation is not to do that until you have a solid client base and you are ready to go. But I also recognize that there is a point where you are so deep in burnout and you are so deep in, you've done this reflection, this isn't right. So there's typically two approaches that I take for like a client who is not deep in burnout, who is just kind of like, this is not really where I want to be anymore. I'm getting kind of frustrated with this. My recommendation is to stay, especially, let's be real with the current economy and things that are going on. Like, let's not take unnecessary risks, but start to. So, okay, anyone who's a leader on here right now is going to be like, I really wish you hadn't said that. But especially for women that I coach, the first thing that I ask is like, how can you give 90%? Because oftentimes you're giving 150%, especially at work. And if this is not the job that you want to have for the rest of your life, if this is not the career path that you're looking to climb, if this is not the company that you want to stay with, like your 90% is still probably better than the majority of people's percentages that they're giving at work. So why are you giving 150% of yourself to something that is not giving you 150% back? And that doesn't mean you stop doing your work. It doesn't mean you become a terrible employee. It just means that like maybe you stop saying yes to every single thing that is asked of you. Maybe you stop raising your hand every single time in a meeting when something needs to be done. And you just see like if anyone else might want to join this party. And that has been a really big, scary, but like formative thing for a lot of people that I've talked to of like, oh, you're right. I could just give 100%. I could just give 90%. And I'm still probably going to get the top rating and I'm still probably going to get the bonus and all of that kind of stuff. But if you're able to do that, then maybe that extra 50% that you've been giving can go towards something that is a side hustle, right? If you're talking money, something that you can bring in more money, maybe it can just go toward like general wellness and rest and taking care of yourself so that you don't get to that burnout point or you're ready to move on. For people that are at the burnout point who are like, I have to exit, I have to get out of here. The one thing that I typically ask of them is like, let's get very clear if finances are, obviously one of the top barriers, like how much money do you actually need? Like what is the actual number on a monthly basis of money that you have to have in order to survive? Because what I found is that it was a lot less than what I had in my head. And I don't mean this forever because I'm also very passionate about like people making the money that they deserve to make and living the lives they want to live. So, living on the bare minimum is a temporary thing, but like understanding that and having that in your mind of like, okay, I really only need this amount of money to survive for 6 months without a job.
And perhaps bridge to what's next.
Yes. And that gives you that goal, right? That gives you that like, okay, this is what I need to do to save that much money. This is how much time I need to do that. And then I can take 6 months off and figure out what I want to do next. Now, are there things in that could be unsafe? Yes. Is there a risk with that? Of course. But a lot of times if you've done any sort of financial literacy classes, like they tell you to have an emergency fund, like emergency funds, like that is a use for an emergency fund is to like transition and figure out what your next step is. So those are kind of the two approaches that I take with people. We go a lot further into that, but it does feel big. And it can feel really scary. And so if you know that you need to make a change, if you're at this point where you're like, it's time, I have to do something, then maybe one of those two paths, one of those two directions can be helpful for you of like determining, how desperate is this decision right now? And then taking the next baby step and the next baby step and the next. I decided I was going to quit my job in February of 2021. I actually resigned in May of 2021, and I didn't leave until July. So
slow burn.
window there, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
waited and the next day it was done. Like this was a
Right.
process. It required working with a coach. It required me to figure out how much money I needed. Like there were a lot of aspects to that decision. So if it feels big, it's because it is.
Well, we are getting towards the very end of our time. And so you mentioned working with a coach was how you got started. And I want to give you a chance to let people know how to connect with you.
Yeah.
They can hop in line behind me for future work with you. And I think you said you have a slide that shows where people can get in touch with you. I know that you can find Jean Madison on LinkedIn, Jean Madison Reiser, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then I've been following you on Instagram for a while. It's Jean Madison with an underscore. What else would you say? I want to give you a chance for closing remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we could put the slides back up really quickly. The one thing that I just want to kind of wrap up with is like this biggest piece of advice, and what we were just talking about really plays into this, is that there is no right choice. I spent so much time trying to figure out what the right choice was when it came to leaving my job, what the right choice was when it came to choosing my next line of work. And I finally had a coach say to me, what if you just got rid of the word right and used a different word? And so the word for me was aligned. And that's really what a lot of this work that I do now comes out of, this idea of what is the most aligned next step. Because in my mind, as long as you're stepping forward and stepping toward a goal, you're never making a wrong choice. Like, yes, you might step this direction. And you're like, okay, I can see how that was helpful, but maybe not where I want to go. Okay, now I can just go back this way. And no matter what, you're still moving toward that ultimate vision. And so the sooner you can let go of this like right choice mentality, the easier life is going to be. It is a process. I have struggled myself with it.
That makes me think of Glennon Doyle, who ends her podcast with, what is the next right thing we can do? The next right thing. It's not the ultimate right thing.
Just the next thing. And knowing that that next thing might lead you to a completely different direction.
Right.
It's okay too. It's scary, but it's okay. All right. So in terms of staying in touch, if you are interested in learning more about my coaching offerings, specifically in Clifton Strengths, embodiment, mindfulness, vision building, etc., I do offer a free discovery call. So you can follow that link there, schedule whenever works best for you. It's essentially a mini coaching session that just gives you a feel for what it would be like to work with me, and then talk through kind of the specifics. I do take on 2 kind of full-time clients per month, which is a 6-month container of weekly sessions. I also offer deep dive sessions, which is really like, you have this goal you created today. We're going to spend 3 hours like going through the whole process in depth, coming out the other end with a really specific plan for how to achieve that goal. I do that a lot with people who are looking to quit their job. So whoever asked that question about being ready to quit their job, I got you. And then my newest offering is around Clifton Strengths coaching, which is just, it can be included in the broader coaching offering, or it can be a one-off session where we do an assessment and just really walk through helping you understand your strengths. I love it. I'm very excited about that. If you are someone who is a team leader, or you're a part of an organization that might be interested in having a similar presentation to this done for your team or organization, you can email me at gmadisonmovement@gmail.com. Or if you just want to chat, you're more than welcome to email me as well. I'm always happy to see non-spammy emails in my inbox at any time. And then if you want to stay up to date on offerings, I do have a newsletter. I probably send that out 1 or 2 times a month, so you don't have to worry about having a lot of spammy emails in your inbox from me. And then if you want to stay connected, like Michelle said, you can, I would love to connect on LinkedIn. Please connect with me. LinkedIn is probably my favorite social media platform. But then I'm also on Instagram at Jean Madison.
Thank you so much for this. We, had a couple of other questions come in that we just unfortunately don't have time for, which tells me, gives us some ideas of other things that people want to talk about. So Jean Madison, thank you so much for giving of your time. To everybody watching, I hope you've been able to stick with us for the extra 5 minutes or so. If you'd like to learn more about Miami Women, you can visit miamioh.edu/Miami Women. And I hope that all of you, including you, Jean Madison, will save the date for our 2023 Miami Women Leadership Symposium here in Oxford on April 28th. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation, because if you're like me, you want to send it to all your friends. It will be available on our website later today. And just thank you so much, Jean Madison, and thank you everybody who joined us today. Love and honor.
Yeah, love and honor. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Hope to see you at the symposium.